as leaders, if we do not acknowledge and understand that people are going to process these things differently, we're going to say, oh yeah, it's time to change. And if we make that change, then all right, let's just do it. It just makes sense. Look at how much more money we have, right? We start throwing the return on investment, our ROI, back at people. Well, look at this change and look at how much money you're going to make. And we go through this process. Why? Because we've already gone through this change cycle, which we'll talk about. We as leaders have already gone through a whole change cycle. We already accepted it, and now we're presenting it to our people. We got all the plans, we got all the blueprints. It makes so much sense. We went from the emotional state of change all the way through the logical state, and now we can see a picture of the future. This beautiful picture of this new glorious place after this change happens, and then we go tell our people, hey, we're going to do this thing because I see this vision, right? That's what, as leaders, right? I keep looking off, oh, I see this vision. I see this beautiful future. And our people are like, why? This is the leader you're becoming. A show where we talk about leadership, stewardship, and building the type of business people actually want to work for. I'm Coach T. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Leader You're Becoming show. I am your host, Coach T. I'm excited to have you. If this is your first time, welcome in. If this is your next time, welcome back. I'm so excited for you to be here. And today I will say we are going to talk about arguably the most important aspect of leadership today. This is probably going to be the most important one because this one will always be present in your business. Today, if there's ever one to listen to throughout the whole show, is this one today when we talk about change, specifically why leaders struggle to lead change. Why leaders struggle to lead change. Now, a little bit about myself, if this is your first time or you forgot, if you're coming back again, is I'm Coach T. I've had almost 2 decades of experience in leadership, anything from, startup companies all the way to multi-billion-dollar firms where I'm running $300+ million regions, to working directly with entrepreneurs to helping them build the business, scale the business, and sell the business. Also continue to have opportunity to work with within the PE space. And so understanding how PE is looking at operating a business on a day-to-day basis, which is very different than traditional corporate and can be very different than a startup phase. So I've seen this at all levels, operations at all levels of a business. And now I have opportunity to we want to share. This is my God calling, if you will. I felt led by the Lord to really start this show, to really share what it means to be a leader regardless of what environment that you're in, because there's a thread between a startup leadership in a startup to leadership running and being within a corporate environment, then leadership in PE. There's some things that are very similar. Why? Because you're still dealing with humans each and every day. And so with that being said, particularly today, we're talking about change and why leaders struggle leading change. And here goes the reality of it. As you know, in business, something is always changing. I like to think about it almost like the ocean. The ocean might look still if you're really far back, but as you get closer and closer to the ocean, you see it is always moving. There's always a current. There's always a body of water that is moving and adjusting. And that change is like it is in our business. The economy is constantly shifting and changing. Our client sentiment is constantly changing. Our competitors are constantly changing. You have new technology entering to the marketplace, a la AI. So things are constantly changing, and it's our jobs as leaders to navigate that change. But particularly what we're going to talk about here today is how do we navigate not just a change internally within ourselves, which we're going to get into today, but how do we navigate the change and leading our people through change? Because as you know, if something adjusts over here in the market, your business may have to adjust or it could die. And if that happens, you as the leader may see that and say, hey, we got to make this move. And you might be quick about going through that process. But it seems that our people seem to be slow. And we're going to actually talk about why that is, maybe for ourselves, but particularly around our people. And so one of the things that I want to make very clear very early on, and this is something that I had to, once I realized this and learned this, I was like, oh, like this makes so much sense, which is this: change is actually external, but transition is internal. And that actually comes from William Bridges, right? William Bridges, who was an operational consultant, and he talked about the psychological and the emotional impact of change within an organization. Not so much the strategy of how to change, but like, what is the impact on people when change happens? And I love the concept there, because change is external, right? You may say, hey, you know what? We need to change our strategy in our marketing. And you just may say, okay, hey, we need to change our strategy in the sense of now we got to think about how we're going to market, so that ChatGPT picks it up, right? We have to consider AI. And you're like, okay, that's a change. Like, it's a strategy. We need to do this. We need to be available when people are searching ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or Perplexity. Like, are we showing up in the search? And so that's a change. But the transition is actually internal. The transition is internal within the humans in the business. And he actually talks about how a business could say, yeah, let's just make a change. But then people are still like navigating transition weeks and months later from the studies that he's put out there. And so why? Because people process things differently. People respond emotionally differently, and they move at different speeds. And as leaders, if we do not acknowledge and understand that people are going to process these things differently, we're going to say, oh yeah, it's time to change. And if we make that change, then all right, let's just do it. It just makes sense. Look at how much more money we have, right? We start throwing the return on investment, our ROI, back at people. Well, look at this change and look at how much money you're going to make. And we go through this process. Why? Because we've already gone through this change cycle, which we'll talk about. We as leaders have already gone through a whole change cycle. We already accepted it, and now we're presenting it to our people. We got all the plans, we got all the blueprints. It makes so much sense. We went from the emotional state of change all the way through the logical state, and now we can see a picture of the future. This beautiful picture of this new glorious place after this change happens, and then we go tell our people, hey, we're going to do this thing because I see this vision, right? That's what, as leaders, right? I keep looking off, oh, I see this vision. I see this beautiful future. And our people are like, why? What we doing? What's going on? Why is that, right? Why is it that a leader, especially an owner, can have so much like excitement about the future? They can see it, they can feel it, and then they go tell their people, and the people seem resistant. Well, what happens actually, if we want to pull in another psychiatrist here, or pull in a psychiatrist here, this is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She actually her work primarily is around grief. But what happened is organizations started noticing that while change is in the workplace, people aren't grieving, but people view change as loss. So really smart organizations started looking at her work to say, hold on, as people navigate through grief, they're actually going through a same curve when you change something in the business, because there's a loss, or there's a perception that a loss might happen because of this change. Now, some things are easy, right? Like if your company gets sold, you might have fear of loss of your role, especially if the two companies merge, and there may be some redundancy of operations or positions. That makes sense. But this actually goes down to, hey, we made a change of what door you go into. And while that might seem like okay, just walk around the building, somebody might be thinking, oh man, well, on the other side of this building, when it rains, it floods over here. Or it could flood over here, or I heard about this situation, or at the end of the night, that side of the building might not be as bright as the other side, and now I'm uncomfortable because, yes, it's light over there, but it might not be enough light. You get what I'm saying? And so we as leaders have to understand that every single time we say we're going to change something, people actually process this as a loss of something else. Thus, if you do not deal with the emotional state and how people navigate change, you and I are going to struggle to lead humans through the change, even though externally we've already talked about the change and we're going to do it. As leaders, the people that show up to this show, we are doers. We are going to process it, we're going to do it, and we're going to make that change, and we will stop and change directions. No problem. And a lot of us don't have issues with that, particularly at work. But our people are going through some loss. And she actually deals with that. And so Elizabeth Kubler-Ross deals with navigating that grief, and organizations have to understand that loss happens. I'll share a story where I remember a time where we needed to make a payroll change, right? Not how much money people were going to be paid, but how we paid it out. It just needed to happen for various reasons, right? And so as we're going through it, one of the people that I was working with and kind of like building this process out around it, we were talking about it, we did it, and then we ultimately did it, right? I was leading it, so I was more consulting them than actually like working with them through the process of it. And I remember I wrote it out, and the last person that I thought would have any issues was the person I consulted. And I remember going to them saying, all right, hey, we got a few more people to talk to. Did you want to finish those conversations, or did you want me to, et cetera, just based on like how the calendars were working out. And they kind of stopped me in my tracks and was like, I am very upset with this. And I just didn't get a chance to talk to you. And I was like, I was stuck. And because I'm in my mind, I'm like, but we were just working on this, and we talked about how the math worked, and and like we weren't taking anything from anybody. And then they shared a story of, hey, I'm about to make a major financial outlay in my life, and the adjustments of this, even though it's the same, actually can have a extremely negative impact. So I'm actually going to have to adjust how I have the outlay of cash in my personal life. And I just remember in my head, I've initially started to like go back through the logical rationale of why we did it, because I consulted you, right, for it. But then I realized, I said, hold on, this change actually means something incredibly unique for them in their individual place. And as leaders, that is an example of, we don't know what people are going through. We don't know what they have going on. And it's very easy to just say, hey, well, this is what the business needs. So, everything got to be about the business needs. Okay, that's external. As far as people are concerned, the business is external. The transition through that is internal. And we have to acknowledge, not just acknowledge, but we can actually show up as even better leaders. And this is the leader you're becoming show. So we're talking about how we become even a greater leader to show up to help people transition through that change. And yes, it is your job and my job, from my perspective, right, as far as I'm concerned, that it is a leader's job to help people transition through that change. That is part of what we do each and every day. And so when that happens, right, like, so what change are we navigating? Like, what exactly is the curve that people go through of change? And so let's talk about that. Number one is denial, right? Denial. What is denial? How does denial show up, right? It shows up with silence, withdrawal, acting like nothing is changing in the first place, or low engagement, right? So I go back to this individual. I was consulting with them, and part of my confusion was I didn't recognize until now that they were actually in denial, because they weren't 100% that what I was consulting with them about was going to happen. I knew it was about to happen, right? Because I was working on it, and I knew how fast, I knew the speed at which I wanted it to happen. But they were consulting freely, because they didn't think it was going to happen, or they didn't think it was going to happen as fast as it was going to happen, right? And so I realized, so looking back at that, they were actually in denial, right? And so how does denial show up, right? Like, it just shows up, they just silent, or they withdraw. How many other times have you talked about something and a change and everybody just looked at you, right? Or, you've presented, let me paint this picture, because I know if you're on this call, you've led anything in your life, especially, as an adult, you probably had this situation happen. You have a meeting and you talk about change. And you're talking about how you're going to change something. And 95 to 99% of people in the room look at you with a blank face. And what questions do you have? Do you have any questions, any comments, concerns? I even started using snotty remarks just to get a movement out of people. Yeah, so when I end meetings, I'll say, any questions, comments, concerns, or snotty remarks, right? Somebody got something to say, because I spent so many years where people just look at me with a blank face. And then I'm like, okay, well, silence is agreement as far as I'm concerned, as it relates to this, because you're all adults. You can all understand. Everybody's shaking their head at me. They're giving me the yes, right? They're giving me the yes, but internally, it's no. All right? I had to learn this the hard way. Yes on the outside, no on the inside. And that no comes with the blank stare. And so that's how it shows up, right? Why? Because they're like, nah. We talked about change before. We said we're gonna do this before, or all right, we keep changing so much. This would be this is just my manager or my leader just came from a conference. They got all these great ideas, and now all of a sudden they're gonna change something again, right? Right? Like, that's essentially what your people are doing off the time. They're like, this ain't gonna stick. Yeah, they'll be on this for a couple weeks, and then at the end of that, we'll be back to doing what we was doing before. So it's denial. Well, what can you do when you know you're changing and this is about to stick and it's not going to matter, and you realize somebody seems to be withdrawn or they are just kind of like low engagement? What can you do as a leader? How can you show up for them? Number one is you can provide more clarity as needed, right? Remember, we talk about this a lot on this show. Clarity equals trust. Again, clarity equals trust. Say it with me now. Clarity equals trust. If there's nothing else you take away from listening to this show at any moment in time, clarity equals trust. Now, you can repeat the why, right? You can go back in and explain the why, and then you can allow for questions, right? Hence why I started using the snotty remarks at the end of when I would close something out, I would say questions, comments, concerns, snotty remarks. Because oftentimes when somebody gives you a snotty remark, it really is their concern, and they just disguised it around humor. And then that also, and then you also usually have the one person that enjoys being the I don't want to say disruptor, if you will, or the cynic in the building. And so that allows them to speak, and they often will speak the mindset of the rest of the people. So just a little tip there. All right. So number one, if people are in denial, number two is my favorite. It's resistance. Resistance. How does resistance show up? It shows up with some anger, some frustration, some skepticism, and emotional reactions. This one right here is the one that as leaders is the most frustrating, right? People will just explode. And you in your mind, it's like, but don't you see the vision? Don't you see how this is going to put more money in your pocket? Don't you see how this is going to, help you and save you time and give you more time back to your family? We hit people with all this logic. But here goes the thing. We hit them with logic after we already went through the emotional process of that change. And now we can logically talk about it. See, as leaders, we actually go through the same thing. This same thing. Now, we may live in each stage at a different moment or for different lengths of time, right? I might not live in denial for very long, especially if I see the problem. I don't want to deny it anymore, right? Or maybe I did deny it for a while, nonetheless, right? But because we've gone through it, now we can see it clearly, and we don't give people space to have their transition through it. This is why I do believe that it's important at times to have champions right? Like people that impact your culture, that influence the business, that may not have a leadership title. This is why it's so important oftentimes to get them involved, because they often will have the same emotional response to change, or things adjusting, or they will have an impulse on how it can be perceived and some of the resistance that might come up, so that you can navigate, maybe not changing, meaning like, oh, people are going to react, so I shouldn't do it. No, the business might require it. It might require an adjustment, but you got to be able to transition. Again, change is external, transition is internal, right? You may have, how you transition that change through is going to be critical, right? So how can you show up for these people that are emotionally going off right now, right? You listen with empathy. Oh man, empathy. You listen with empathy. You acknowledge their concerns. One of the worst things you can say to somebody, in my opinion, is, I don't know why you feel like that. Like, no, you ain't me. I don't expect you to understand how I'm feeling because you're not me. Acknowledge people's concerns. Acknowledge it. That doesn't mean you agree to it. You just acknowledge it. Goes a long way, right? And if you ever want a good book of understanding empathy at the highest level, I do highly recommend Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Also had the opportunity to go to one of their live trainings. I don't get paid for it. It was one of the most life-changing things. And I say life-changing, meaning I learned so much. I remember what I studied there, and I remember how I felt and what I learned from it. Life-changing in that respect. One of the best things you can do, good investment. So nonetheless, what else can you do? You can maintain accountability without becoming an authoritarian. Hey, the line is the line. We're going to make this change. A level of accountability to the new standard or what have you. That's going to be the same. But I can still show it with empathy. I can do it gracefully, right? So that's number 2. High emotions during this one right here. High emotions. Number 3. So people went through denial. Now they're starting to resist. But number 3, they start to explore. That's exploration. How does it show up, right? It shows up with curiosity. They start asking questions. They start experimenting. Okay, well, if we did, buy this equipment that you're recommending we buy or use this new technology, how would it work with our CRM? How would it work, with our clients? What's our client experience going to be? Do you think our clients are going to feel too much communication if we start texting them more often? Or if we start using AI, okay, you think some people hate how the bot says this. When you start hearing those type of things happen, people are starting to they're starting to live in that new world. That's a good thing. Let that, and this sounds very sometimes it pings between resistance, skepticism, and exploration. This is why you can't become authoritarian with this, because you will start to suppress it and you'll push people back into denial, or you'll push people deeper into resistance, right? Let them explore. Let them come up with all the ways that it can break. It's only going to help you anyway, because you don't have all the answers as the leader. I know I don't have all the answers. Maybe you're one of those ones that do. But I don't have all the answers. There may have been some things that I can't see. I can't see perfectly around every single corner. But my people might already be over there around that corner, if you will, or have clarity on that. And so it just gives you another opportunity to even define, refine the change that's happening, because change isn't always static. You can have an idea and your people resist it because of X, Y, and Z, and you're like, oh wow, that did make it better. We're still changing, but you just enhanced it. And now you got their buy-in with it, right? So as they start to explore, reinforce that progress, right? Again, involve them into the solutions as we're talking about here. You can even create some short-term wins saying, okay, hey, I remember once going back to a different pay plan change, right? I will say I've worked, a lot of my career where I've seen a lot of pay plan changes. At one company, it was so, I don't want to use the word bad because it depends on who you're talking to, but it changed so much every year. Not only were you anticipating if I would make more money, because naturally you would have a review and then there's a pay increase. That was their process. But they also would change the pay plan. So every year you could you're all right, am I going to make more money? But then you also have to say, am I going to make more money because they changed the pay plan? And that could be favorable or unfavorable, and sometimes it was unfavorable. Even with an increase of base, the variable income, the variable pay, the commission bonuses adjusted to the point of where it was like, well, wow, even if I hit my growth numbers that you projected me to hit, I'm actually still going to make less money because my variable number changed, right? And so you can understand. So now, with that being said, I remember being in that situation where I was the one constantly experiencing the change. And I remember saying, if I had the opportunity, when I had the opportunity where I was going to be the one that was responsible for changing compensation, whether base, variable income, etc., I would do it. I would try to do it in the most human way possible, meaning I'm not going to show up on a call on Monday and say 2 weeks later it's going to change. I try all, unless I have to do that because it's above me, or like if we don't change, like the business can die type situation. That's a whole nother conversation. If we're there, I try not to do that. And I remember we're going to make a change, and I said, hey, this is what's going to happen. And people were, oh my God, I'm going to make less money. I got to do, almost twice as much to make the same amount of money. But it's just where we were. We just couldn't support the pay anymore. We just could not support it as a business. And in our business, we had what was called a triple win, right? We have it's called a triple win. Essentially, the client must win, the team member must win, and the business must win. And all three have to be true. Now, how much each one wins is a different conversation, but all three had to win. And I remember, the comp plan was beneficial to the client. It was beneficial, extremely beneficial to the team member, and it was not beneficial to the company at its scale and at how we were growing. And so we had to restructure the comp plan. So, but I remember saying, hey, I know this is a big deal. And I know this is going to be a transition. And I know you probably got to get some things and some affairs in order, especially if you were consistently doing really well with your variable, like my top people. I gave them 6 months. I said, I'll give you 6 months. I told them in June, and I said by January 1st of next year, that's when it will change. So keep earning as much as you need to right now. Stack your cash if you need to stack your cash. But as in January, we got to make this adjustment. So I know I've made this. I'm telling you, this change is happening. We're navigating through the emotions of it. I went through the math with people. I don't know how many times I wrote it on my board. Like, this is why. And all of them at the end, whether they didn't like it, they understood. And they said, wow, okay, I see why you need to do this, as the leader of this department. Yep. And then, but I said, all right, well, I'm still going to give you the time. Wrap up. We've already been eating it as a business for these years. 6 more months is not going to make or break us. I can tell you that, being very transparent, talking to my team. But at the end of this year, we have to maneuver this around a little bit. And so we did. And guess what? When it got to that year mark, we were already done. It was no major issues or major complaints or anything of that nature. Why? Because we gave them time. Right? We gave him time to work through the change. You start touching, as they told me, you start touching a man's money, you start having problems, right? And so it's one of those situations where in that moment, I needed time to let the expiration really set in before we can get to the next one. By January 1st, in my example, we got to number 4, which is commitment. They were committed to it at that point. They knew it. They were committed to growing the business and being a part of the success of the business. And that's where we were. And so number 4 is commitment, right? How does commitment show up? It shows up with ownership. Like that team, they owned it. Hey, we got to hit our margins. We understand this, and this is directly impacting it. Okay, right? Confidence. Let's move forward. And then future focused thinking. Then they started thinking of other ways and other things that they can do to make sure they get to their number. And they're also thinking about the margin now on the deal. Yeah, I actually have people that think about the margin, right? As people thinking about the margin. Whoa, why? Because we went through this. We didn't just be like, this is going to be it. Oh, well, you've been making so much. You've been making extra. Now the business needs to do something. No, we're not going to do all that. So they're all bought in. So that's number 4, which is commitment. You keep empowering them, right? You recognize their growth and you develop future leaders. Like I said, people now are like, okay, I can do this job, but I got to make sure that this job is done in a way that it doesn't impact the margin. Why? Because we got to have a triple win. right? To one of the points of one of the team members actually coined it a win 3. They coined it a win 3. So we used to say triple win. Now we just say a win 3. If you know, you hear one of the team members say a win 3, that means the team, the frontline workers are thinking about the client wins, the team member wins, and the business wins. It was like, yes, that's what we're talking about, right? So that's what we got, right? That's what we got today. So understanding that you are responsible for helping people, again, transition through change, right? People start with denial, they resist. That's where the emotions come in. You got to just persevere through that one. Or ask questions. Then they get to exploration. They start kind of talking about their life with it happening. And then they get to commitment. And you're growing from there. All right. So I got a couple reflection questions for you, as I always do, so that you can walk away with something as it relates to today and how you can be better. Right. Number 1 is, where might I be mislabeling emotional processing as resistance? Number 2, do people experience me as stable during uncertainty? That's important. You as a leader, when uncertainty happens, when change happens, are you stable? Because if you're not stable, it's going to be very difficult to have them navigate through the change. All right. And I'll leave you with this line. I have to write it down because it's so important. It says this: anyone can announce change, but mature leaders help people walk through transition. Anyone can announce change, but mature leaders help people walk through transition. Wow. Thank you so much. You made it. You made it here. And I know if you made it this far, you got something from it. You got something from it. I hope you were taking your notes and you're understanding and appreciating how we got to navigate through change. And so if you ever have any challenges with this or have any questions about this, here goes the best way to get directly in contact with me. And something else now, because you're listening to this show, I'm about to let you in on something brand new that I just integrated into my website. Website is here, but you can actually chat with me via AI. I put my brain into the ecosystem of AI. and all of the lessons, all the learnings, my almost 2 decades of experience, right? I'm plugging in there so you can have access to answer questions, to get some information, to get some of the methodology that I've been teaching along this show. It's all available to you, again, right here at my website. And you can also contact me directly there. So God bless. Thank you. Until next time, see you soon.